Marine Le Pen. She's been climbing in the polls in recent weeks after spending years trying to tone down her far-right image. Well, today, in efforts to counter this, Macron spoke to French conservative newspaper Le Figaro today, where he praised his predecessor Nicolas Sarkozy for his work on protecting borders, reforming the Schengen area, and taking down illegal immigration networks. Well, joining me to discuss the dynamics of this race is the Paris columnist for The Telegraph, Anne-Elisabeth Moutet. Welcome to the programme. It is remarkable to see Le Pen climb up in those polls. She had been nipping and tucking with a more radical candidate, Zemmour, until recently. How has Ukraine changed the face of this race?
I should say Ukraine absolutely killed off the dynamic of Eric Zemmour, because Zemmour appeared to be so much more radical and so much more tin-eared than Marine Le Pen on this, that he stopped being in tune with at least a good, a third of public opinion, very strongly. His first reaction was to say that France had no vocation to take in Ukrainian refugees, and then he sort of waited very long to react to Ukraine and to deny that he had said, he couldn't deny it, but to try to walk back declarations he'd made over the years that Putin was a great Russian patriot and that France needed her own Vladimir Putin. This may have been 5 years ago, but it harmed him. It's not very good for him.
It's interesting because whilst Zemmour might have been more recently aligned with Putin, Marine Le Pen herself has had a bit of a problem in this area. Just at the start of last month, she pulped 1.2 million pamphlets that were printed that had a pretty prominent picture of her shaking the hand of Mr. Putin on them. But her rhetoric has steered away from Ukraine, focusing more on the cost of living. I suppose that's helped her in the short term, but it is still a bit of an Achilles heel.
It is. It ought to be. All three extreme candidates, Éric Zemmour, Jean-Luc Mélenchon and Marine Le Pen, have form in defending Russia. And this is usually due to something that's very structural to French society, which is sort of reflexing anti-Americanism, which is both ideological and something that sort of comes too naturally to the French. In the case of Marine Le Pen, what she did, first of all, she was much more reactive than Éric Zemmour. She realized that Ukraine was something dangerous. She said quickly that it was an invasion and that nothing warranted an invasion. And then she very sort of prudently said nothing at all. And then when the question of refugees came up, she said, of course, we will take refugees, pointing out these are the kind of refugees we want, quote unquote. That was something. The other thing is that I think she actually understood better the mood of the country. One of the things about Éric Zemmour is he's very good at old-fashioned politics, which is tasting the sort of what a crowd will expect. But he is not a digital native. Actually, he's not digital at all. He finds it difficult even to organize a Zoom. And the result is that he had no clue what happened worldwide in terms of emotion, surprise, and circulation of information about Ukraine. And I think that's really, these are two things, two failings that he showed. One being that he knows nothing about foreign policy. He doesn't speak English. He doesn't speak any other language. He only reads obsessively in French. And the second was that. Meanwhile, he has helped Marine Le Pen immensely because now she looks much more mild. She looks easy to deal with. She is a 53-year-old woman who is an avowed cat lady. She is much less abrasive, and she could have dreamt him up. Even in that period when he was gaining votes and personalities from her party. Actually, he has helped her because now she looks quite respectable.
Which is remarkable given the history of her party and its links with all sorts of very nefarious ideas and indeed people. Looking at the National Rally, as it's now called, back in 2018, the Front National changed its name to National Rally. Do people think this is a party that has changed? Because, of course, a lot of the faces are still the same.
Well, the one face that created the National Front in the 70s is entirely different, and that's Marine Le Pen's own father, the 93-year-old Jean-Marie Le Pen. And he was a bit of a monster in all directions, including as a parent, and she finally fired him 10 years ago when he made one anti-Semitic joke too many. And she, quite honestly, she's not concerned with all the obsessions of the old-fashioned French extreme right. She has been called by her own members. She's been said to be surrounded by a gay mafia. She is not a social conservative, and actually all her social platform in terms of benefits and stuff like that is quite frankly nationalistic, in that she feels that the French ought to have a better social network than immigrants. But apart from that, she has a very almost socialist point of view of sort of keeping pensions and benefits and various aids to the economy, to small businesses, and to people who've been through the mill in much comprehensive way. So she comes across as someone who got rid of her father, changed the name of the party, avowedly wanted to detoxify the party. She did fire some people who were too aggressive. She certainly refuses any kind of racist or anti-Semitic rhetoric. And she comes across, even though her platform actually is still quite hard, she comes across as somebody who has changed. It took her 3 presidential runs, but this is where she's at, which is why she's within distance of getting, certainly she probably will be in the second round, and she's now in the margin of error of the latest polls, partly because of Emmanuel Macron's weakness to get possibly the presidency. I'd say about 20%. The bookies say 17%.
It is remarkable looking at the age profile of those that seem to be backing Ms. Le Pen. It seems to be younger people rather than older people, potentially people who feel locked out of the economic system. As you mentioned, her economic programme is really quite left-wing and nationalistic, anti-trade, anti-market, pro-state. And of course, herself has taken a number of loans from Russian banks in recent years. Some really quite worrying aspects of this party. I suppose if you are a centre-right voter in France, you're probably better off going with Mr. Macron, aren't you?
Many people are going to go for Emmanuel Macron, and strangely enough, I have met Zemmour voters who say, no, I'd rather vote for Macron because she is the past, and also they're very much afraid that if she doesn't get too many votes, the danger is that Jean-Luc Mélenchon, the hard left candidate, will be in the race. And it's more widespread than you think. Strangely enough, too, because this is really a fascinating election. It looks from abroad, it looks like the same election as 5 years ago, but it's entirely different. And the one candidate who's got most young people is actually Éric Zemmour. Éric Zemmour and Marine Le Pen actually are completely complementary, but they can't stand one another. He has more men, 61%. He has voters in more educated and more urban categories in the southeast of France. She has more women, 55%. She has voters in the Rust Belt in the north and northeast, but also in any small town and deserted area of France where there are no public services, and where if the single company that operated in your city disappears, you have no jobs. Her voters are much more like Trump voters as some of the northern Brexit voters, and the two of them represent a sort of move of the general French mood to the right. And the one extreme left candidate, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who's taken all the space from all the other left-wing candidates who practically do not exist anymore, is, apart from the immigration questions and apart from some aspects of domestic policy, he is working on the same tropes as these two candidates. It's a weird election.
A remarkable election, and one that kicks off this Sunday. Of course, then the second round several weeks later. We'll be following it with great interest here on GB News. But for now, Anne-Elisabeth Moutet, the Paris columnist of The Telegraph, thanks so much for joining us to talk through those issues.